I'm going to pass straight on to our next talk now. We have Rebecca Hale and Jasmine Moore, and they're going to talk about queer nature, the powerful message of LGBTQ+ in the natural world. Thank you so much for being here, and over to you.
Thank you very much for having us as well, and we're really looking forward to sharing our work with you today and having the opportunity to do that. But before we begin with the presentation, we hope that you can take the quick survey, which you can then see the link to. So that survey includes 5 questions and should take no more than a quick minute as well to go through. But it relates to animals and plants that have LGBTQ+ connections, and many that we included in our work. The final question is like a personal reflection just at the end of the survey, which we'll relate to in the presentation as well. So once you're in that survey as well, we want you to simply click through the first 4 questions, as they're meant to be a kind of quick and fun way to see your immediate response to this topic, and then answer that final question with a little bit of thought. And then as we go through our presentation, we're going to reveal the answers to the first 4 questions as we go through, but not explicitly, so you'll have to listen carefully to see if you were right. But hopefully then, if you weren't sure of the answer, then you will be by the end. And what we really hope to do in this quick survey and throughout the presentation is show how many links there are to LGBTQ+ in the natural world, but also the wider messages and stories it can inspire. Now, I'm just going to hang on just for a moment before we start the presentation as well, just to make sure as well we've got a few answers coming through, but I can already see that we have. So that's really interesting as well. And as I said, we will reveal those answers as we go through as well, and particularly to that final question as well about confidence around this topic. So it looks like as well some people have been able to access the link already. So I think as well, just in the next 10 seconds, then I'll start our presentation as well. So if you haven't already got that link, make sure you get it down, but then you can do those first few questions whilst we begin as well. Okay, lovely. So as I said, obviously, welcome to our presentation today. My name is Rebecca Hale, and I'm the Learn Officer at Gresson Hall Farm Workhouse. And this is Jasmine Moore, who's co-presenting with me today. She is our Kick the Dust Youth Programme Young People's Champion for Norfolk Museum Service. And we work together on creating a queer nature tour at Gresson Hall Farm and Workhouse. Now, to start with, I thought I would give a little bit of context about the museum at Gresson Hall, but also a little bit of context for this work, because I wouldn't blame anyone if they hadn't heard about Gresson Hall Farm Workhouse. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of background there. But the museum where we work as well highlights the story of rural Norfolk. It's just outside of Dereham, which is a small town in the middle of Norfolk, and which is then about 20 miles outside the closest city of Norwich, and has only 1 bus going past it per day. So really, really isolated. But it is really popular, and it's probably because it has lots of different opportunities to engage with that history, from a heritage farm to a Victorian workhouse. So in a normal year, not this year obviously, we would normally receive about 60,000 visitors. And normally in our school programme, we receive about 10,000 children. But Gresson Hall Farm Workhouse is also part of Norfolk Museum Service, which is a local authority service that includes 10 museums across the county. And in the past 2 years, I've been particularly passionate about bringing together the LGBTQ+ stories that we have as a whole service. And that work, really for me over the past 2 years, was really done with an activist stance, and particularly in response to the LGBTQ+ context in Norfolk. I personally believe that museums have a societal imperative to represent the people of the past and today, and to make sure we're being inclusive, accessible, and tackling hate and prejudice in the world. Recent stories, as you can see on these headlines, and as obviously many of us know about, of LGBTQ plus hate crime rising under the mandate of Brexit. As well, reports in Norfolk of gay people not feeling like the county is for them due to feelings of isolation, and as well, shockingly as well, of LGBTQ plus allies being beaten up for speaking out in Norwich, where it's seen as the most accepting area of Norfolk, and showed that a lot more needs to be done to instill a greater awareness and acceptance of LGBTQ plus individuals, particularly as well in Norfolk. I found that my work and that of others in museums had sought to do this through focusing on people's stories, which are really powerful and inspiring. But when speaking to the natural history curator at Norwich Castle for an LGBTQ plus tour there in 2019, I saw huge potential in the diversity that nature offers and the important message that sends of how natural diversity is. In particular, I was inspired by the juxtaposition of the commonality of diversity in the natural world to the fact that there's still only one animal species that's homophobic and transphobic. And of course, that's us. So to challenge this, I wanted to speak more openly about diversity in the natural world that's all around us. So I was looking for an opportunity to develop this further, or if that didn't happen, I'd create the opportunity myself. Now, the Queer Nature Tour would give me that opportunity, but it also built on previous LGBTQ plus work at Gresson Hall, including a workhouse LGBTQ plus tour and a social media project with the local secondary school both in 2019. And you can see a quote from the secondary school students on that side. Now, this work was positively received by the young people involved in the social media project, saying that it helped them feel less isolated as young people living in rural Norfolk who identified as LGBTQ+. So this previous work had helped to show that LGBTQ+ stories were an important part of Norfolk's and Gresson Hall's history and made a great impact on those who had access to them today. However, I was personally aware that I didn't want the museum's LGBTQ+ work at that point to be tokenistic or one-off. And I wanted ways to embed it into future work in the learning department, including references to Gresson Hall's natural collections and connections, and making sure that LGBTQ+ had a legacy within our museums. Now, in my role as learning officer, I also support the museum's Kick the Dust youth programme, which aims to get young people aged 11 to 25 changing the way we work and the focus of our projects as we are led by their interests. I had worked with Jasmine before as part of this work, and she wanted to explore LGBTQ+ stories further at Gresson Hall. So I'm going to hand over to her now to detail her interest in leading this project.
I was presented with a few different options of tours to help develop the LGBTQ plus nature tour immediately appealed to me the most. I was excited to have the opportunity to work on a topic that I had a personal interest in and to approach it from an angle that I hadn't really considered before through nature.
Great, so we got permission then to work together in creating an LGBTQ plus tour on the natural world, which we later called Queer Nature. And our plan was to present it for the 2020 Heritage Open Days event. In my role as supporting Kick the Dust, I was there to facilitate Jasmine's ideas and support a way of working for the tour. But no sooner had we agreed, then the first lockdown in March began, and then we had to adapt to online working. So in those first stages, we started exploring more of the examples we knew already from previous work and knowledge, such as lavender, carnations, and violets. And these were a really important starting point as they were symbols that have meaning to the LGBTQ plus community, and the tour would provide a real chance to explore those meanings further. For instance, the association of violets and lesbianism dating back to the poet Sappho in ancient Greece, who gave garlands of violets to her female lovers. As well as researching, we also use this time to discuss our stance of gender in the animal world, and more importantly, what we wanted to achieve from the tour. In particular, we wanted to explore new stories that we hadn't done before, and especially those that represented all of the LGBTQ plus community as much as possible. We wanted to build on the previous LGBTQ plus work to embed it more at the museum and encourage people to see our museum and the world around them through a different lens. We not only wanted to discuss the natural aspect, but wanted to use it as inspiration to talk more widely about LGBTQ plus lives and experiences today. And this is particularly clear in the story on lions, where when 2 male lions were photographed mounting in Kenya's national park, the Kenyan government responded by saying they needed counselling and had apparently learned this bad behaviour from tourists and television. In this tour, this then led on to the fact that 66 countries still criminalise LGBTQ plus individuals, and these attitudes we can then see filtering down into interpretations of life in every form. By focusing on these aims, this gave us something to really ground us when researching, selecting, and telling stories. I'm now going to pass you on to Jasmine for her to explain how we then developed this work.
So as you said, we initially looked at previous LGBTQ plus related projects as a place to start, which gave us more of the symbols like violets and lavender, though there were a couple of animal examples early on that we wanted to include, like sheep and hyenas. For the animals, it started as general research until we found examples that we wanted to look at in more detail, like the ribbon eels. We wanted to make a concerted effort to include creatures that related to more underrepresented parts of the LGBTQ plus community, in particular transgender links. Once we'd picked out our stories, we contacted our natural history curator who had suggestions for things to add. He talked about the way chickens will take on male characteristics when cocks aren't present, which we ended up including. He also brought up how species names, some are gender neutral, like chicken, while some aren't, like hen signifies female and cock male, and how some animals like peacocks and yak are specifically called by the male species name, and some like cows are called by their female name, which was some interesting food for thought. We also went to the curator at Gresson Hall to ask if there are any objects to link to our chosen stories in Gresson Hall's collections. For the sheep and chickens, there were actual animals on the farm, local rare breeds that were quite interesting to research. Once we had objects from the collections, first we'd link that object with our animal or plant. We'd then explain the LGBTQ plus link, and finally the importance of the story. For example, for the ribbon eels, I started by talking about an eel glaive, which was the object we had in the collections that connected to eels. This led into talking about eels more generally, before focusing on the ribbon eel in particular. I then explained the LGBTQ plus link, which in this case is the fact that all ribbon eels transition from male to female as they grow. I then conclude on why this is important, which for this example was the fact that transitioning is a natural and necessary part of the eel's life cycle. And to connect to us, I talked about fetal development and how we are all female for the first 5 to 6 weeks of development before the Y chromosome kicks in for males.
Great. Yeah, so we were actually planning on delivering this tour in person. We had all these stories ready to do that for Heritage Open Days. And as Gresson Hall has lots of open space, about 50 acres of land, we thought we could achieve this through having restricted numbers and doing it all outside, even if that meant only doing a shorter selection of stories. But we were told the museum service could have no events. So our Heritage Open Day had to move online. And we thought we could explain each of our stories in a short video. At this time, though, we were also only allowed staff on site. So I had to be the one going on site to film content, with then myself and Jasmine recording voiceovers at home to go over the top of those films. And we added in images as well afterwards. And then our learning manager helped us to edit those videos. But neither myself or Jasmine had ever ventured into the world of digital content at that stage. But what actually, on reflection, has come out as something really important was it never occurred to us not to do this work or delay it. And whilst we were facing many difficulties in practically doing it, we knew how important it was, and we had individual reasons that drove us to finish it.
We couldn't do videos for every story we'd researched, so first we had to pick our favourites. I ended up picking the ribbon eels and the chickens. I picked those two because they both had ties with gender and transitioning, which was a topic that I'd wanted to highlight. We were told that the video should only be about 2 minutes long, which meant we had to edit our notes down to accommodate the time constraint. This wasn't too difficult for me with the eels, as their section was relatively short, but the chickens, it was a different story. I managed to keep the section about hens acting like roosters when a rooster isn't present, and that on rare occasions they all actually transition to male. And I talked about gynandromorphy, which is a form of being intersex that various insects and birds, including chickens, have displayed, in which they will be physically half male and half female split across their whole bodies. Trying to convey all that information in 2 minutes was a challenge.
Yeah, so we only actually had time to create 4 videos. As Jasmine said, so there was one on chickens, one on eels, but then one on lavender and lions. But we'd actually researched 10 stories in total as well. But we thought we'd use this opportunity to show you a short and edited section from our eel video that speaks in more detail about the transitioning process that all ribbon eels go through, as Jasmine mentioned. But also as well, we did not want to exclude any stories that we'd researched. So we also did a short PowerPoint presentation that would then go on our website of the whole 10 stories, including sheep and violets, and then released the 4 videos on the day that we'd originally planned to deliver this tour. So this edited video shows the LGBTQ+ link that eels have and the significance of that story, including the framing and the text that we put at the start of each video.
I specifically am going to talk about the ribbon eel. They can be found in lagoons and reefs in the Indian and Pacific Oceans. They have a ribbon-like fin that when they swim makes them look like one of those ribbons that rhythmic gymnasts use. They are unique looking, but there's something else that makes them unique. All ribbon eels are born male, but as they get older and longer, they start to develop female reproductive organs until they become entirely female and can lay eggs. You can see this transition for the eel's colour. Juveniles are black, and as they grow, they turn into the more well-known blue with a yellow ribbon-like fin. They eventually become entirely yellow, which signifies their transition to female. While there are other animals that are all born male, clownfish for example, they usually only make the transition to female when the dominant female of their group dies in order to replace them. But ribbon eels all make this transition, assuming they live long enough. It's theorised that they evolved this way because females can reproduce better when they are larger in size, so if only fully mature ribbon eels are female, they can breed more effectively. Transitioning from one sex to another is a completely natural and necessary part of the ribbon eel's life cycle, which makes it unique as a species.
So a really significant and positive element of this being moved to digital was that then we could have a permanent space as well on our website and on our YouTube channel that shows a visible commitment to LGBTQ plus stories from Norfolk Museum Service. And also Jasmine and I obviously have all of the detailed tour notes ready for a future tour. But we also wanted to share with you one of the stories from the 10 from each of us that didn't make that final cut video, but we thought would give a chance to shine here. So I will start with my favourite choice as well that we couldn't include on video, which is the female spotted hyena. Now, we couldn't include this as practically we couldn't get to the fossil that was to be the object that linked to the female spotted hyena in our collection, but I really wanted to because I think they're really amazing. So spotted hyenas were actually native to Norfolk 700,000 years ago, and the same species exists in Africa today. Their society is notable for being a matriarchy and has a hierarchy within this, with the highest ranking female eating first to help her reproduce more successfully. And biologically, the female hyena is also unique, as she's the only female mammal with no external vaginal opening, instead possessing a distended clitoris that resembles a penis and is known as a pseudopenis, and you can see in the images here. These different genitals have led people in the past to describe female hyenas as hermaphrodites, but today we'd say intersex, but this is not the case. And many biologists believe this distended clitoris has survived for so long because they actually benefit the survival as a species. This is because through their pseudopenis, the female spotted hyena urinates, mates, and even gives birth as well, if you can imagine as well that. They also use it to have complete control over their mating partners. As if a female spotted hyena changes her mind after mating, she can immediately flush out the male sperm and mate again with an alternative choice. Now for Jasmine's choice.
My favourite story that I very nearly picked for the videos is about the gay sheep. Many animals exhibit homosexual behaviour, but only 2 species have shown a preference for same-sex relationships, even when opposite sex partners are available. One obviously being us human beings, and the other being domesticated sheep. In flocks of sheep, up to 8% of the males prefer other males, even when fertile females are around. A study in 1994 found that homosexual male sheep had smaller hypothalamuses, which is known to control the release of sex hormones. Biologists posit that smaller hypothalamuses could also positively affect the female sheep's fertility and therefore may have been encouraged through breeding programs. And these sheep show that homosexuality isn't something that's unique to us, humanity.
Great. So we thought we'd end with just some final reflections from each of us in these particular categories. So reflections from the public, the museum, and us as well. So in terms of the public, so the Queer Nature Tour got interest from local radio, and particularly because it was something very different from other offerings for Heritage Open Days, and they really wanted to promote it. And I've often done LGBTQ plus work through a Heritage Open Days in the past, as they provide access to promotion, but also offer us as a museum a chance to be a bit bolder and try out something new. The public response to the videos and content online has been overwhelmingly positive. And this was in contrast to the LGBTQ plus social media project that I mentioned at the start of the presentation that had been posted the year before and received some negative comments online. So part of our reflections was on reasons why that might have been, and wondered if it was because the previous work was the first time we'd explored LGBTQ plus stories as a museum, and potentially that had now laid the groundwork for more. Also, the queer nature content were primarily videos rather than social media posts. So the greater information and frame at the start of each video gave more detail and explanation to each story. But these reflections are really important for us when considering future LGBTQ+ work. In terms of museum responses, our curator Megan at Gresson Hall and the natural history curator David at Norwich Castle also welcomed this focus. And David in particular gave us far more content than we could actually fit in. He'd had a lot of this information himself and was almost waiting for the opportunity to use it, showing how little this focus had been used by our museums so far. It's also really refreshing working collaboratively with and being led by a young person and being challenged in a good way to see what decisions they would make and what direction they want to take the tour. Jasmine was demanding more of our collections than the museum would have thought of a few years ago, so that was really great. And even more so in a time, I think, when this work could have easily been shelved for different priorities during the pandemic. Just to finish with my personal reflections, for me, by exploring these links in nature, I have started to view the world in a very different way. And it's further cemented in me the knowledge that diversity is truly everywhere. And it's made me marvel at the wonder of difference and how special it is, and that we should be talking about it more. I would like to deliver the full tour one day in person at Gresson Hall, as I've seen LGBTQ+ work have real impact, especially in places where it's often least expected. A final reflection is that these stories will be in your collections and all around you and hold real power. So be inspired to do more with them.
I learned a lot while working on this project, not just about LGBTQ+ links in nature, but how to work remotely, because I'd never done that before this whole lockdown and pandemic, and also how to adapt on the fly. At the start, we were developing a tour we'd actually be showing people around, but as it became clear that wasn't going to be possible, it transitioned into a digital tour which had quite different requirements. Working on this tour was one of the things that got me through the first lockdown, and it's made me excited to work on tours in the future.
Great. So just having a look at the survey results. So 53% said you were kind of somewhat confident in this area, and 23% said not confident, and the rest then much more confident. But we hope we have helped show ways in which to not only learn more, but also how great it is to explore these connections. And on this final slide, you can also see full links to the full videos of the tour, as well as my email address, if you'd like to ask us any further questions, apart from those that obviously we have time for now. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, guys. That was really, really interesting. Something other than a well-known comedian being ridiculous about in one of his stand-ups, I'd never really actually considered all that much. So a real journey there for me as well. We've got some questions in the Q&A. So if I'm okay to just fire those at you. One of our attendees says, it sounds like a really interesting project. How did you navigate language around gender and transitioning in terms of biological sex versus gender identity?
So this was, and this was something, as I said, that Jasmine and I discussed right at the start, because as we said, it's gender being a social construct was something that then we thought, actually, well, that doesn't apply to animals in the same way, obviously, it does to humanity. So we didn't want to use that same kind of language. So you can kind of see there how we approach this. And it was much more in terms of that scientific as well understanding. And we were very careful as well not to kind of put that same kind of terminology on. So when we talked about sex and transitioning, it was much more in terms of that than gender as well, and much more about how it linked to kind of survival as well, and how natural as well and essential it was, rather than obviously how they were identifying as animals, because that doesn't apply in the same way. Was there anything else you wanted to add, Jasmine, around that? But I know that was a really important kind of conversation for us right at the start as well.
It was something I put in the conclusion in the section about chickens, because there was a lot of that transitioning in their section about whether gender is a term that should even be applied to animals. And I think I concluded that it isn't really necessarily, because they don't have the same relationship with that we do.
Perfect, thank you. Kat's come on and said, how would you recommend people to explore this further if they don't have a museum collection?
Yes. So for us as well, in the museum, quite often we were using lots of things that were in our gardens as well, relating to the plants that were symbols to the LGBTQ plus community, but also the animals that we had on the farm. And there were some in our collection as well, like the eelglaive, but actually a lot of the collections, and this is how we kind of designed it, would be that we'd include the whole of our site. So we'd be able to walk into the gardens and then walk down to the farm and explore our outside spaces and celebrate them as much. So I would say that it's a really great opportunity to engage with this at lots of different sites and lots of different places as well, and explore this in gardens and farms and at zoos as well. So there's real potential there to do that. If you don't have that museum collection, because some of our links to, but they were actually, we really tried to make sure it was as much outside as possible.
Perfect. I guess there's also, if there's a lack of research about it in the wider world, there's much more work to be done. So just keep your eyes peeled as well for as that work begins to come out. Jack said that this is fantastic work. It feels like stealth activism, reducing the idea of our queer community as the other. And Sue has said that she wishes David Attenborough could see this, and that she's really looking forward to the website. Any other questions from anyone? Cheryl's posted a link. I think what we're going to do is put some of the comments available later, so you'll be able to see that link that she's posted. Thank you once again, guys, for that work. It's obviously been a bit of a labour of love, and you've done some incredible stuff around it on a really novel and new subject. So thank you for also bringing it here for us today.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you very much for having us.
We're now going to move to lunch. You guys need to get up, walk around, make sure that you're feeling comfortable, ready for us to start again at 1 p.m. We will recommence at 1 p.m. Please remember to hydrate and take a moment for yourselves before we're back on screens at 1 o'clock. Thank you.